Priya, thank you so much for joining me today for our Women's History Month series. Before we start your interview, I would love for you to tell a little bit about your background. For those at home, Priya Gupta is the Director of Finance for Bloom, and she has been here for, I believe, over a decade. So if you want to give a little bit about your background, that would be fantastic.
Sure. Thanks, Mackenzie. Thanks for having me. So yeah, I have been with Bloom for close to 9.5 years. I am in the corporate finance field. So it's a very exciting field. I actually have enjoyed it. I've been in finance for close to 15 years. And in Bloom, I started in an analyst role. Over time, have progressed, and currently, again, I'm the director of finance. Managing, basically, what I do is manage our financial plans, and I find that really cool and exciting. Before Bloom, I was in the Midwest. I was again in a finance role, basically in a large ag processing trading company. Decided I wanted to move to California. Bloom and me was a perfect fit back then and still is. In terms of educational background, I did my MBA from Purdue University in finance. And before that, I've got like a bachelor's and master's in economics. So I come from a very math-based background.
That's awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing your background. Moving into our interview, this year's theme for International Women's Day was Choose to Challenge. How do you feel like you're challenging and calling out gender bias and inequality and celebrating women's achievements and or helping to create a more inclusive world?
I choose to challenge by basically being myself and what I say, not conforming to any stereotypes. So what that means is I choose to be confident and secure in my own abilities, speak for myself, stand up for myself, express my thoughts, my opinions, not keeping in mind what people are going to perceive me as, and just try to be myself day in, day out. And then hopefully, I think it paves a way for other women to feel comfortable to be themselves, feel confident in themselves. When it comes to inclusion, there are two parts for me. One is at work. At work, I feel like we need to encourage more compassion and encourage more, just having an ability to talk to our team members more at a personal level. So to really understand what are their individual unique challenges, where do they come from, and then try to enable a culture in which we still have their career growth in mind, but also understand their challenges. So you kind of like have this unique plan tailored to individual people. And you can't do that unless you start really connecting with people on a personal level. So that's, and that's men or women, but it's got to be some level of bringing a compassion to the work culture. At home, that's the second part of it when it comes to inclusion. I have two young kids at home. I have a boy and a girl, so I see both sides of the equation in some way. And for me, for us, I guess it's really important that our kids grow up and they grow up to be what they want to be, not really, their choices being defined by the gender they are. And so what we try to do is encourage their own individual unique personalities, and they both have very unique personalities. So, and if they want to do ballet classes for both of them, sure. If they want to both do tennis classes, that's fine, right? But the point is to encourage their individual unique personalities. But for my daughter, I still do make a point that I consciously make an effort. She's very, free-spirited. So consciously make an effort not to squash that in any way, right? So the way I'm trying to break through barriers of saying, all right, I'm not going to let perceptions define me, not let that be something for her, and provide strong role models for women in terms of either books, the Rebel Girl books is amazing for little girls, and or just role models in person through family, friends, at home in some regards.
Absolutely. And it's so important with the next generation of children moving in, whether they're men or women, moving into a role of allowing their individual personalities to shine through and allowing them the avenue to really pursue any feats. So that's wonderful that you're giving your kids those opportunities. So renewable energy employs about 32% of women compared to 22% in the energy sector overall. What can the energy industry do to grow inclusion and diversity?
So when it comes to diversity, right, I think a couple of things. First, I think the pool of candidates that really comes into the energy industry needs to be much, much broader and much more diverse. So I think it goes to firstly the educational institutions. You got to partner with the educational institutions, encourage them to have a very, very diverse pool. And that becomes like sort of a feeder pool into the industry. So that's one. I think within the industry, I feel we have a lack of really strong role models that people from the outside can look into, hear their stories, be inspired by their stories, and then be encouraged to actually enter that industry. So the combination of that will really help at least have more diversity or a diverse pool enter the industry to keep them there, whereas your point of inclusion comes in. I strongly believe inclusion can be very strongly encouraged with a corporate culture driven by meritocracy, having focus on skills and focus on talent development and collaborating with each other. So as long as you create a culture around that, right, and focused culture around that, that should help with inclusion as well.
And on your topic of inclusion, how do you think men can be better allies to women in the workforce?
I think the first and foremost is that men really have to look past their deep biases that they have. And I call it a very subconscious bias. I think half the times people, men or women, don't even realize that they have this very, very deep subconscious bias. It exists from early childhood days of how we grew up, what we saw, but there is a very, very deep ingrained bias. So they really have to first identify that it exists and then look past it, right? But I think the biggest challenge does end up being first even identifying that these biases exist. So, just an awareness of the bias is probably a good place to start to then drive an action to address it. So that's where it probably needs to start, in my opinion. But I think the question, at least for me, on a personal level, extends beyond that. Because I think I ask the question, how can men generally help women, right? And I take my personal example. I have had great allies at work in terms of men, but I don't think I would have been able to work effectively if I did not have a good support structure at home from my husband. So he's been there, right? Like a true equal partner. He's been the kids, dropping, picking, prepping meals, taking them to classes, all of that. And I have been able to work without my mom guilt while he's been doing that. And if he was not, I would not be able to be effective at what I do and do what I love to do. So I think that is very critical to have a support structure at home in your partner, whether that's men or women. And I think that's a very key role. But beyond that, men can be very, very great allies in their role as his father. I grew up, my father encouraged me to, again, be myself, right? And, break social norms in some way if that's what I wanted to do. And I think as fathers, men can definitely do that. So encourage your daughters, right, to go and, own the world in some regards. And that actually probably has a very, very large influence on women as and how they grow up.
I couldn't agree more. And it's wonderful to hear that you do have not only that support system, but an equal partner that's really helping to foster equality across genders for both you and for your children growing up. In your everyday role, how do you work toward dismantling gender stereotypes?
Gender stereotypes, right? I'll give you a couple of examples of the typical ones I have faced or seen, and then what I guess do about it. So the couple of ones I see are typically that, all right, if a woman is showing emotional sensitivity, then she's not going to be as competent. So, and then if for whatever reason, and I've seen the latter more than the first, is that if she shows any elements of confidence, dominance, or just ambition in general, then she's perceived to be aggressive, arrogant, bossy. And it's a very different take on how those words are used for women versus men. And so what do I do about it? I think I first just choose to ignore it, choose to ignore perceptions, choose to ignore what people think. And day in, day out, kind of again, just try to be yourself. Be confident in your own self and sometimes show the dominant part of yourself, show your ambition, or sometimes show your emotional sensitivity. It's fine, just be yourself day in, day out. And then at the end of the day, over time, unfortunately, it's take time, but over time, people see that underlying talent, underlying competence, and that's what comes out. And so then it's not a struggle, in the first time around. But that's how I choose, right? You got to stay true to yourself and stay at it pretty much.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So, what is one of the toughest career challenges you have faced? How did you overcome it? And what lessons did you learn to help progress your career forward?
Maybe I've been lucky. I've not had any one particular highlight, which is like, all right, that's my toughest career challenge. However, I think we all face challenges on a day-to-day basis sometimes, right? So there are some days that are great, some days that are not so good. And if I look back, the ones which have not been so good have all been characterized by one same element for me, which is I've got too much on my plate. I've got too much going on. And that is usually then either, you have this complex, you've got either a superwoman complex or a supermom complex, and you don't know how to ask for help. And that usually leads to stress and your quality of work suffers. So I think it takes time. Over time, I've learned a couple of things that helps me manage that better. It doesn't go away, but it helps you manage or plan for that better. So the first, probably an important one, is identifying when you've got too much going on and being okay to ask for help. So that's, I think the biggest thing for me is it's okay to ask for help, to prioritize, to work with your manager and have a very open line of communication to find that right balance. And it comes more from us as women not being able to ask for help to a large extent, at least for me. So you have to get comfortable with yourself to do that firstly. Then comes the second part, which is we'll always have a lot going on, right? There's always going to be something. And so think back and plan for that. I think there are ways to plan for that. So when you know that you've got busy days, busy times coming, I've consciously started planning for that in terms of task lists, of course, but much beyond that, more so in terms of mentally preparing myself, right? So if there's anything at home that I can take care of that. Don't try to pile up everything at that same point in time. So, and that leads to being more effective at what you're doing because you're more focused on that. I think the last thing is honestly consciously trying to de-stress when you can. So mainly more about focusing on find that right work-life balance and focusing on that. I de-stress by spending time with my kids and family, honestly. So I do that, right? So anytime I need a break, I go play with them. And then also very importantly, finding your own me time. I've recently found the value in that, which is what do you use? Focus on yourself in some way also. And that's really helped me, at least combination of that has helped me manage more, but just do it more effectively and not stress out as part of that equation in some regards.
Absolutely. And making sure that you have that personal time for yourself is really what's going to set you up for success. So it's great to hear that you've been able to prioritize that throughout your life and your career. Thank you so much for joining our series. We really appreciated hosting you for our Women's History Month, and we hope to hear more from you soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mackenzie.